Well, here we are with yet another episode of What Is It with Bob Prater. And today, a very, very special guest. His name is David Sabatino, and he's truly one of the great filmmakers, historians, and authors of the Jesus movement. And that happens to be a particular interest of mine. So I've known David for a long time. We've not really spent a lot of time together, but we've known about each other. And this is just a wonderful privilege to me today to welcome to the broadcast, David Sabatino. Welcome,
hey,
David.
Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you for saying yes. It just makes me so happy. Let me put this up on here. Look at that. Just like professional stuff. So, David, how's the day going, man?
Good. Another day in Boise, Idaho.
So now I know that you grew up in Canada, right?
I did. So what I'm doing here, I have no idea.
Well, you're inching closer to the border because I know you were in Southern California for a long time. What took you to Idaho?
Oh, wow. My stepdaughter had 2 babies, and she wanted to raise them outside of California. About a year and 6 months ago, she turned to my wife and said, "We want to leave." And so my wife said, "Let's go." And so we both moved. We moved our family. They moved their family, and they're 10 minutes away because we wanted to be beside the girls. We have two small grandbabies. So that's pretty much it. And it was just a compromise of where we could go. And we could go anywhere. So this is what they wanted. Portland. We wanted St. George, Utah. We compromised. So sorry, that's too long. But that's how I got here.
It's all good. Hold on. I'm putting something on my timeline here. I'm sharing this to my own timeline. And if you want to, we can share it to yours as well. All you got to do is go to my page, go to mine, and then just share it. So It'll be live on your page as well. So I'm going to get off of this and get back over to here. All right. Close this down. All right. So what I'm really curious because you're not anywhere near as old as I am. I don't think. I'm 60. You're probably not even 50, are you?
I'm 51.
There you go.
10 years.
So you were really at the tail end of all of the Jesus movement kind of stuff. I mean, as a matter of fact, it was pretty much done by the time you were.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
I got the vapors of it and was really powerfully impacted by the music. So
what spawned your interest?
Now you're taking me back. I grew up in the Pentecostal church.
Okay.
And they're constantly talking about revival.
Right.
So I wanted to know what was the stuff of revival, right? Because we're running up to the altar and this seems to be the focus. So the last revival of note was the Jesus movement. There wasn't a heck of a lot on it. So I started just researching myself. I think it was probably my personal questions of what is this? The Pentecostal movement is long on spiritual experience. It's very short on explanation.
Right.
And I'm not trying to be, that's just the way it is. I think they would admit to that. And so I had to go searching, and I talked to all these people, and I'll tell you, just in talking to them, it answered a lot of my questions, And then I just decided that I wanted to kind of put some of it down on paper, and that spawned into the 2 movies that we did. So, and of course the book that you've done books. I did a bibliography that just came out of the research of my,
but about as comprehensive as anything. If you're a fan of the Jesus movement, give them the name of the book.
It's called the Jesus People Movement Bibliography. But I got to say, if you want to read a good book on it, it's Larry Eskridge's book. It was published by Oxford Press. I think it's called God's Forever Family. That's an actual history. Mine is a bibliography. So I defer to Larry on the larger history.
Okay. Well, I like that. In your documentaries, you start both of them. And by the way, for those who are watching, the documentaries are Frisbee, The Life and Death of a Hippie Preacher, and Fallen Angel, The Outlaw Larry Norman. Am I correct?
Yes.
Okay. I want to make sure I had the verbiage right. But both of them start with the same statement, a Bible story by David de Sabatino. You want to explain that?
No. Yeah. I knew you were going to ask this because everybody asks this. So I went back and I read this great poem by Walt Whitman, and it synopsizes what I was thinking, probably in a more, if I hate this word, but secular way. He ends his poem, O Mio Life, by saying, what is the answer to the question that I posed? The answer is that you are here, that life exists an identity, that the powerful play goes on, and you may contribute a verse. Everybody, whether they're Christian, non-Christian, Muslim, Jew, it doesn't matter. They contribute a story of the ongoing dialogue between God and man. My two Bible stories are the Gospel according to Lonnie Frisbee, the Gospel according to Larry Norman. That's pretty much it. And to also give the impulse to people to say, your story can go a lot of ways. How is your story going to, go? What's your verse going to be? So that's what I'm trying to say.
Do you feel that you accomplished the goal in both films?
With respect to what?
Well, did you say everything that you felt you wanted to say? And let me ask it a different way. If you were to do both of those documentaries over today, would you do anything different?
Let me go back to what you said before, and I'll answer that question. The intent in my head was I was a gospel writer going 30 years later, like the guys did with Jesus, and try, not the same thing, but here was, in Lonnie's instance, this wonder worker. The stories about him are just phenomenal. And so I'm collecting these things and trying to piece through them and put them down. And in them, I see biblical themes. And those are the themes that I put in the movie. So in that sense, yes, I think in both films, I accomplished that. Would I do anything differently? I don't think I would do anything differently with the Frisbee film. I think with the Larry film, I made the mistake of thinking that simply putting that he had a child out of wedlock, that was enough. That people would have gone, there's something wrong with this guy. But that wasn't the case for his fans.
Right.
For his fan.
Right. For
anybody else that didn't have that kind of slavish devotion to him, it wasn't a problem. They were like, oh my God, is this guy for real? You could see just in the telling of the stories by the people that worked with him what the deal was. So I would be a little bit more pointed, I think, with Larry's.
A little more pointed?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
In my estimation, we were gracious. See, now, a lot of the hoopla that has come back, especially within the Christian circle, is that it was too harsh, and I read something else that it was a savage attack and all this stuff. Not in my estimation, There was a lot more that we left out, So I think you got off.
How exhaustive were you in the research? I mean, you got a hold of basically anyone that had anything to do with Larry during the making of that film.
That would talk, yeah. I tried. I certainly tried.
Were there some that wouldn't talk?
Well, sure. I mean, there were some that had no desire to talk, and I could understand why. His second ex-wife, his second ex-wife, Sarah, talking. I understood that. Were there other people? Sure. I mean, and then there were people that were just trying to thwart what I was doing. There was a lot of nonsense behind the scenes.
What was your relationship like with Larry when he was alive? Because you knew him, right?
I mean, I barely. I mean, I knew him. He came to my house a couple times. That's it. I mean, just, there was he was a flit about guy. There wasn't a lot of relationship with him. I mean, and I certainly didn't have one with him, but I knew him and we dialogued. But
okay. because there was, even when he was alive, there was a little bit of vitriol between him and you. I used to witness some of this just as an observer on Larry's pages and on Chuck's forum, Chuck Girard, some of that, and so and listen, I have a point of view too, but I'm not here for my point of view. I like the movie. I like what you've done. I like what you did with Frisbee. But you're right. There are a lot of people that think that this was a personal attack. As a matter of fact, I've already gotten since I announced that this video cast was going to happen today, I've gotten people getting a hold of me saying, "Hey, why are you having that guy on? Why are you giving him a voice?" Right.
Well, Larry was. And I've got to say, if this didn't happen to me, you have to admire the malevolent genius of it all. He knew how to cast the story, and he knew this was coming down the pipeline. So he got out in front of it, and he said, "This guy's coming to attack me, and here are all the reasons." And then he baited me into those kind of arguments, And then once he had that, and he kept a file. Larry kept a file on everybody. Who does that? Oh, the stories, Bob. No, and I don't want to do this anywhere. The guy's dead. He's gone. We've said what we said, but the fascination of him is boundless, because to see all the stuff that he did, it's like, first of all, why? Second of all, look at what he's doing here. This is genius in a very perverse sort of way. So he would write letters to people in Nashville and say, this guy's coming after me and he's got a bone to pick and stuff like that. And from my perspective, I simply asked him questions.
Right.
I asked him questions that cut to the heart of the things that he was telling. And a lot of those things, and I didn't realize at the beginning, they just weren't true. That's how it started. It started at my house in 1990. I asked him about this story with the one-way sign, that he lifted up a finger. He tells the story that he lifted up a finger because it got broken and that he was offering up submission to God, and everybody else started doing this. I found that to be just a fabrication. I talked with a kid who actually fashioned that sign, and he changed the strike symbol and he extended a finger and put a one-way stencil under it. I have a book that says that. So I went to the guy and I said, "Well, what happened here?" He said, "Well, Larry started telling that story." He said, "Larry started telling the story that he came up with this." He says, "The elders of the church that we were in, Hollywood Presbyterian, went to Larry and said, 'You got to stop this. You're lying.'" They confronted him.
Wow.
And he, not only didn't he stop, he wrote the song One Way and continued with the lie.
That was his answer.
So, Larry was a character.
That's a great. You know what I really like, though? The beautiful thing, and I use when I sit with people or when I'm doing teaching with people, I use some of what you've done. And by the way, let me just say this: fair or foul, David Sabatino, rabble rouser.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I can't escape that. It's in me. It's my DNA. I don't, I like Chuck Girard turned to me one day and he says, "You're the stone in the shoe." And I laugh because I know it's just, and people say, "Why do you do that?" I'm not trying to do anything. See, I don't think I'm being a rabble rouser. I'm just trying the truth.
Right.
I'm just saying what I think is true. And people go nuts because you're telling the truth. I didn't say anything about Larry that wasn't true. Not a thing. And look at how mental people go. That's my fault. What's wrong with their devotion towards Larry? Can't they see that the guy was human? Why are they trying to take away his humanity? It's ridiculous, right? So is it my fault, or is it people that can't understand the truth or can't handle the truth?
So that brings me back to this thing of, yes, he was human, as was Moses, as was King David, as was many of the heroes. It's why I really love that you said a Bible story by David Sabatino. It's warts and all. You're going to tell the whole story. You're not going to sugarcoat, but it doesn't lessen the impact that someone like a Lonnie Frisbee or a Larry Norman had, not just on culture, but on the church, right? I never said that. I mean, I don't get why they think that,
Larry was powerfully influential in my life.
Mine too.
Right? I mean,
Yep.
we all thought he hung the moon back
Exactly.
I listened to that stuff. It changed who I was. It
Right.
allowed me that kind of, looking through those sandpaper eyes, because that's what he was doing.
Yeah.
I said that to him. I owe him a lot. So to get this kind of response as a fan, it's like, okay, what am I supposed to say? I mean, he then framed that story that I was out to get him, and okay, if that's what you want to believe. But there was not, I think at a certain point, to parse this in my Canadian way of thinking, and I grew up a hockey player. I've got a hockey shirt on. Larry dropped the gloves, right?
Oh, yeah.
He dropped the gloves and said, "Come on," and I was like, "Okay." And I kept asking him, "Stop, stop," and he wouldn't. So, okay, you want to fight? Let's go. That's what we do in Canada. We drop the gloves.
He dropped the gloves. So, David Sabatino, the journalist in you overcame the fan in you at some point.
Yeah, oh yeah. I mean, when I met him in 1990,
When did that happen? Was it in the midst of meeting with him?
Oh yeah, yeah. He's a strange. I mean, he was strange, And my mother turned to me and said, "David, come on." And I was like, "Yeah," and that was it for me. I was like, "Okay," and he became human, but then I started seeing through the stories, and I was like, I probably wouldn't have liked Lonnie either.
Maybe not. And yet, boy, now let's talk about Lonnie for a minute, because this is a guy who really changed culture, because the story as you tell it is that Calvary Chapel would not be Calvary Chapel had not Lonnie Frisbee entered the picture, and there would be no Vineyard really if he had not been there on a Mother's Day back in 1980 whatever. Is that, would you say that's correct?
I think that's fair. Yeah, I think that's fair. I think in the case of Calvary Chapel, when Lonnie and Chuck first met and shook hands, I think that's the birth of Calvary Chapel right there. Now, was there stuff before? Yes, but once that happened, again, whatever was on Lonnie's life, whatever that spiritual atmosphere that was suffusing him and around him, which had nothing to do with him except his sovereign choice, started to work. I don't know how to explain that other than to say that's what happened. I can explain it in Pentecostal terms because we're very spirit-soaked, and it's very suffused with that Holy Spirit anointing and whatever. That handshake, I think that changed everything. In the Vineyard, that moment on Mother's Day, I think ignited something that brought them to a worldwide platform. I don't think you can disagree with that.
Yeah, I don't think anybody can. Let me ask you this. What came first? The Jesus People movement or Lonnie Frisbee exploding on the scene? Because really, wasn't he a catalyst for the whole movement?
Those origins are always hard to figure out. I think that in certain senses, he was, I think that there was a lot of things going on independently of one another. Lonnie wasn't the only countercultural liaison. Certainly there were things going on independent of him. So I would say no. I would say he's not the catalyst for the Jesus movement. He's certainly catalyst for a lot of the West Coast stuff.
Right.
And very powerful. I mean, I don't think there's anybody like him that I came across. But there's stuff going on in Florida. There's stuff going on, all sorts of things. Back in, Linda Meisner's on the scene in 1967, predates Lonnie. I mean, there's lots of stuff going on.
Right. So come back and let's speak Pentecostal language for a minute, because I speak that a little bit as well. Mm-hmm. The move of God that was birthed on the West Coast, that kind of traversed the world. How important was Lonnie in that?
Well, I think something larger than Lonnie was going on. I don't think you can saddle him with that he was the most important. I would defy that. I would kind of stand askance at that. Sure. Certainly for Calvary, certainly for what was going on the West Coast. I mean, Kay Smith, the wife of Chuck, had a prophecy that because of Chuck and Lonnie, because of Connie and Lonnie, that God was going to bless the whole West Coast. Did that happen? I certainly think, some of that happened. I mean, Time Magazine comes out and does a pictorial layout where they're sitting in the Pacific Ocean. Did they orchestrate that? I don't think so. So a lot of interesting stuff went on, birthed out of whatever Lonnie was and however God wanted to use him. Very, very weird. It's hard to explain this to people who don't have a spiritual framework. Like, how do you explain that to them? So I've tried to bring that into the mainstream, but they're not buying that. And maybe rightly so, and that's fine. It's just it's a hard sell,
Although,
on the other hand, you have hyper Pentecostalists who are like all over this, and I've been in some weird places where people are gone to where Lonnie's buried at the Crystal Cathedral, and they're praying over his gravestone. Oh yeah, and you're just like, okay, because they want the same sort of thing that he did, and you're like, do you understand what an invasion upon this guy's life this was? They don't get it. They want the power. They want to be the guy or the woman. It was a tremendous invasion.
The power really did not rest lightly on him, did it?
I don't think it ever does. I think those kinds of guys, Jeremiah, I wish I was never born, because God is so close to them. Yeah. The prophet, there's a toll for being that guy or that woman. And I don't think people understand or count the cost. They just see the power and they want to be the player. And I think that's why God picks certain people, to do that.
So I know you covered some of this in the film, but can you speak to some of the treatment that Lonnie received at the hands of the Calvary Chapel movement, Chuck Smith, and again from John Wimber at the Vineyard?
Sure. I think Chuck was better with him than the Vineyard was. I think, you have to. Chuck is an interesting character. The people said, "Oh, you're just doing this movie just to hurt Chuck," and I'm like, I'm not a Calvary Chapel. I think he dropped the ball with Lonnie. That's all. That's all I said. I mean, that's about as much grief that I wanted to give Chuck. I told that to his son. I said, "Look, your father has gotten the lion's share of the hoopla. I'm going to wrap him on the knuckles. Big deal. He's big enough. He can take it." I think that Chuck, look, he's a 40-year-old guy. This ex-homosexual comes into his midst, and he realizes this kid has the anointing of God.
Right.
He realizes it. I mean, you got to give him props for that. Not many people, realizing it or not, would put him up on his pulpit. Now, Chuck didn't ordain him. So he brought him in, but he also had his hand against him too, right? So there's a pull, yeah. So there's something interesting going on within that. And Lonnie's always pushing the envelope at Calvary Chapel. And Chuck is resisting that because he doesn't like this Amy Semple McPherson stuff. So eventually they butt heads and Lonnie leaves. He's gracious to him again in 76 when he comes back. Wow. He lets him back in, but it's different. So Chuck was gracious. Wimber, on the other hand, I think, brought him in. This stuff happened, and then when he found out about the homosexual liaison, I think went a little bit too harsh on Lonnie. I think what they did was wrong, and I think he really harmed him. And then picked up the phone every time that he was somewhere and told the people. And I don't know that you need to do that. Right. And then all of a sudden he makes a 180, and I can't figure out the reason for that, because he'd been 10 years treating him pretty brutally. Right. And then suddenly he picks up the phone and he pays for Lonnie in his last days. He picks up the tab for Lonnie to. So it's a mixed bag all along the way. But I know that they hurt him by ostracizing him, both of the guys.
Why do you think John Wimber picked up the tab at the end? I mean, you're as close to the story as anyone.
Right. If you listen to the stories told by Lonnie, God came to Wimber in a dream and told him, take care of Lonnie or else.
Wow.
You know. Okay. You know, other people say that never happened. How would they know? Were they there? I mean, you know, Lonnie said John told him. Okay. Because he asked him. Right. And there was only one other person there, the one that was taking care of Lonnie at the time, and he put him up at Balboa Island for the last few months of his life. So that's the story. And to me, that makes sense. Something happened to change John's mind about how he treated him.
Right. And that story, based on Lonnie, that story makes as much sense as any, doesn't it?
I don't have a problem with that. When I heard that, I went, yeah, that's about it. That smells right. You know, God trying to fulfill the prophet. That's the story about me. That's how I started this. The words I heard were, you know, tell the story about my prophet. Honor my prophet. I heard that in my head. Like, not like a bell was going off. I was on the phone with Chuck Girard. And Chuck, I told him that I'd been doing some research and that I'd phoned Calvary Chapel. And I'd said, you know, I've got this book and it's got all these, you know, names in it. And I would like to find out what happened to these people. This is 30 years left, you know, after the fact. I said, what about Lonnie Frisbee? It says that he was important at Calvary Chapel. The lady on the phone said, he just died, but he wasn't really that important. And from her perspective, that's true. Well, see, but he hadn't been there in 30 years. So from her perspective, it's all about Chuck. And what she said was true. But I repeated that to Chuck, and Chuck got a little bit ticked.
I bet.
That, you know, he was the story, Dave. And something inside of me just went, I can't explain it. But what I heard was honor my prophet. And that was the bell ringing in my head as I was doing all this stuff. I can't claim to any inspiration for the Larry thing. You know, that was a story I didn't have to tell. The Lonnie one was inside of me. That was something that I was like answering a call to do. So.
Yeah. What other stories are inside of you right now? Are there stories that you're getting ready to tell?
Yeah, I've hooked up with a guy named Mike Knott. Do you know that name?
Sure.
Yeah, Mike and I have become friends, and I'm going to try to tell his story, and then I'm going to do Christian music. Yeah, Mike is a tough story too.
Wow.
It's like I don't know what it is. Maybe it's like it's catnip to me because I don't want to tell, you know, Steve Green's story. I mean,
well, come on, man. He was in Whiteheart.
That's great. And then what? And then what are we gonna say? You know,
right?
You know.
So why Mike Knott?
And I'm not, you know, dissing Steve Green. Good for him. He's
sure
been a faithful. Okay. I don't tell those stories. That's not me. Why Mike Knott?
You don't want the easy stuff.
No, I mean, this is a challenge. To try to tell Mike Knott stories is as challenging as anything. What the guy is, he's turbulent. You know, Mike and I have had some conversations, you know, about and he's bleeding in his music too. I mean, yes. I was not a fan early on. Like I knew who he was, but I never listened to it. I listened to a couple songs and I was like, yeah, that's okay. But lately I've been listening to it, and the guy's emotion and the guy's ability to communicate, just the screwed upness of him, the messiness of his life. You know, it's compelling. I can see why people are drawn by it. You know?
Yeah.
And he was this close to, you know, huge.
Right.
You know, and he was signed and they were on their way, and then he messed it up.
Was that what band was that? Was that the Aunt Betty's?
Yes. Yeah.
Right.
That was, I listened to that record and go, oh, this is a good record. I mean, that's as good as anything I've ever heard. You know?
Right. Well, it was unlike anything that I had ever heard at that point. But you're right. There's a transparency and a bit of not just angst, but a little bit of anger in the music, right?
Absolutely. And you know. So
are you writing his story? Or are you going to do a documentary?
Yeah, I'm going to do a documentary.
Really?
Yeah. He was here, spent a week, and we got to know one another. And you know, he sang for my grandbabies. It's hilarious. You know, he started doing a punk rock version of Old MacDonald. I got it on tape somewhere. It's really funny.
Oh my
And,
God.
you know, he's just a very sweet guy. But he has another side to him. You know, there's some issues, and we're going to deal with all that, because I like his story because he's messy, you know,
Right.
and that appeals to me. I don't know why.
Well, it gives hope to everybody when you listen. When you hear a messy story about somebody who, in their own way, has changed the world a bit,
Yeah,
it gives hope to all of us. I mean, if we want to view it that way, or we can get pissed off if we're a fan and go, "How dare you bring this stuff up?"
Well, I think with Lonnie, and I saw it, people were really innervated by that. They were, you know, empowered by this because of that. It was like, well, if God can call Lonnie,
Right.
you know, I'm invited too. With Larry, when I started, I thought that was the story too.
Right.
Now, I knew that there was weirdness, but I know that but as you go into the story, you realize the concentric circles, and finally you're like, with Larry, I couldn't find anything to come up. Now, there's other people that will say, oh, you know, you could have done this and you could have done that. Not to my knowledge, you know. From what I read, from what I heard from these people, I didn't see any other way of doing that.
And they weren't the ones telling the story. It was you telling the story. You know, you want to tell a different story, go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, go back. You're not going to interview Randy Stonehill and get different things out of him.
Right.
It's not like I twisted his words. And why are you mad at me? They said it.
Right.
You know? To a person, they all said the stuff that I put in there. They didn't disagree with any of it.
Right.
It's just when the backlash comes, you're alone. You're like, oh, you know, you shouldn't have done that. And I was like, well, you know, when I was doing it, you weren't saying anything, you know, which is fine. The cheese stands alone. That's, kill the messenger. That's fine.
Well,
Part of it.
let me jump off of that. The cheese stands alone. You don't seem to collaborate much with other people unless it's your subject. Would you call yourself a guy who just likes to, you know, hermit yourself away and get the work done?
That's certainly not by design. I don't know any other way to do it. I mean, there's nobody banging on my door saying, hey, well, that's not true. I got to say, that's not true. And that's not true totally because, you know, the Frisbee story is morphing into a narrative feature, Hollywood feature. So, you know, and that's...
Tell us about that.
Okay. I will put on my braggart hat, which I don't wear very well. I don't. It's not me. You know, the Frisbee story is a compelling one. Yeah. It's a good story. I don't care who you are. Anytime I've ever told this story, people of all ilks are like, they latch onto something. I had a grad school teacher who was fascinated by Connie. You know, a woman, you know, getting saved on LSD, getting baptized naked up, and, you know, she just was like, oh, you know, she was fascinated by this because she was a feminist, and she thought, this is so interesting. And I think that there's that other side. If you're not interested in the signs and wonder stuff, there's the homosexual element, which is certainly in his life, you know, and anytime that thing is played for other people, and here I'll give you a story of how this happened. There's a guy in Hollywood who has Academy Awards. I could say his name, but I won't do it. He was at a meeting for one of the first films. It was the 20th anniversary, one of the first films that had a real strong gay character, and it was really Hollywood mainstream. And another guy came to him and said, when is the next film that we can do to emulate this one? The film was Philadelphia. And he had, I guess you can figure this out from this, but he won an Academy Award for directing that. He holds the option on it. Anyways, so that guy came to him and said, how can we do the next Philadelphia? And he said to him, you know, have you ever heard of Lonnie Frisbee? So, you know, here's a Jewish guy telling a gay billionaire, let's do a story on Lonnie Frisbee. You know, that to me, that's like, okay, you know, that's a cool story. Whether it happens or not, I don't know. But we're close. We're getting there. So.
But you don't want to name.
well, I mean, you could probably figure it out from what I said, but I think all will be forgiven after that. So if that happens, the Christian culture is very fickle. So if you get,
Yes.
So if you do that, they won't care they won't care about the Larry Norman stuff.
Let me ask you about the elements of homosexuality that are in your documentary, and that we know were in Lonnie's life, the things that he kicked against for his existence. You've read the stuff that came out just a few years ago, the stuff that he posthumously that was published, his memoirs.
I know of them.
Okay, because he talks about a lot of the stuff that's even in your documentary, but it's interesting to me that this becomes one of the pervasive issues facing the church today. Here we are, and it's still the issue. I don't know how much you want to talk about yourself and what you see and how you view, but what do you see and what do you view?
Sure. To me, as I'm reflecting on this, and again, I grew up conservative, Christian, evangelical, fundamentalist. I'm the last guy to be doing this. Like, it kind of took me by surprise right at the end. We're 2 months out from me finalizing this, and Connie turns to me and says, in an interview, she says, Dave, he defined himself as gay. And you could have knocked me off a chair because I was like, what? I had never heard anybody say that, or it clicked. I don't know. But early on, he thought that he was gay and that he was saved from it. But in his early life, I didn't get that until right at the end. And so as I'm reflecting on this, I'm thinking, look at what God does. God, 40 years before this becomes the focal point of a lot of angst, calls this kid who's a homosexual. You think that wasn't on purpose? I mean, here's a prophetic statement, and it's not suggesting that the gay lifestyle is affirming or it's not a sin. It's not doing any of that. All it is doing is saying that I am interested in these people, and I will save them, and I will communicate with them, and I love them. That's all it's saying. I think that's pretty powerful. So for me, that became the larger story of Lonnie's prophetic life. He wasn't prophetic as you would understand him. He was a bumpkin with the Bible stories, and he would butcher stuff, and none of that mattered. With his life and who he was, I think that's the story, and I hope that's the story that we tell in the movie, and certainly part of the story that I tried to tell in my documentary.
Well, his life to me was like a parable at times. He lived out the things that he talked about. It's interesting to me. If I were to say this to you, what's your reaction? If I were to say that the Frisbee documentary brought this issue of homosexuality and the church to the forefront, and I think has really furthered the dialogue, what would you say to that?
I hope so. I'll take that. I think that it certainly wasn't my intent, but if that's what the outcome is, great. I think it needs to be talked about, and fantastic. I'll tell you, I had this moment where I was up in Vancouver, and it was in my cousin's church, and those big revival posters where they have everything that's ever happened in revival history. So I'm looking at this thing, and I'm talking to my cousin, and I said, I will not be happy until I can see, and I was just about to say Lonnie Frisbee when my eyes hit Lonnie Frisbee and Chuck Smith, and I went, that's because of me. I think I can claim that.
You can.
But with regards to the larger, I hope so. I hope it contributed to that, because I think it needed to be discussed. There's a lot of people that are hurting from this issue. I saw people come out of movie theaters just weeping, and I was really taken by that. I was like, great, but I had no idea that would hit somebody so hard. None.
The original cut that I saw, you invited me down to Orange County to see the original cut, and it was filled with Larry Norman music and some of the other stuff. And it was way longer than the 1 hour that you had to edit down for PBS and whatnot. What I saw in that first one, is that all available on the DVD and the extras or no?
Yeah. Yeah. We pared it down because of the show wanted a 60-minute cut. And to be honest, and I have to give props to the PBS editor, Rachel Rainey. She was fantastic. She taught me a lot. You know, going up to PBS, having been involved in the Christian world,
right?
It was, you know, I know maybe I shouldn't say this, but it was like night and day. It was like, you know, the Christian world is very nepotistic. Is that a word?
That's a word.
Okay. It, you know, they hire their mother and their Aunt Betty and Uncle Lou, and, you know, and substance and quality suffers. Sure. Not there. You know, they're all hired because of their resume and that they know what they're doing. And so it was nice working with people that were just sharp as tacks, and I just really benefited from it. So she cut it to very sleek and everything. It taught me a lot about story, that unless it adds to your story, take it out.
Right.
Which is hard to do. But she really did a good job. So that's why it's an hour. And yeah, everything else went into the...
And you felt that there had to have been a sense of panic in you when you thought, "Oh no, there's no way I can cut this down to that level, to that number." I mean, you had to have had a sleepless night or two.
It was. I mean, you know, you think that some of the stuff that you put in there is gold, right?
Right.
But it's not. So that's why it's always good as a filmmaker to get a second set of eyes. So, you know, you always get somebody else to look over your shoulder and say, "Well, this, you don't need this. You know, take this out," and stuff like that. Somebody that doesn't have a passion for it. Somebody that is just looking at it as a filmmaker and doesn't have the kind of, you know, love for the subject that you do. Because that little tidbit that you think is cutesy and stuff, it's an extraneous thought that's going to take your viewers out of the game. They're going to wonder, well, why are you putting that in there? You know? So you learn that there's tricks to the trade.
Well, listen, this has been a joy for me. One of the great pleasures of anything that I've ever been involved in is to interview you, because David Sabatino, I consider you to be one of the premier storytellers on this earth.
Yeah.
So, well, listen, I just want to say thank you to you, and keep going, man. Keep doing what you do. It's really interesting that a guy from a Pentecostal church up in Canada that worked at didn't you work at a worship magazine? Worship music? I think so.
You're killing me, Bob. Yeah, I did.
Come on, man. And now I just love, I mean, to me, you're one of the great wits in the church. The way that you view, the intellectual way that you process, and yet you process through spiritual eyes as well. It's no small thing, my friend. And I just want to say thank you for everything that you do.
I appreciate that. I really do.
Good deal.
It's nice to hear.
All right. Until the next time, unless you got something else you want to say.
No, I'm just wondering about the people that have been saying, so what are we going to say to them?
People, listen, here's what's going to happen, David. This thing, I'm going to post it all over the place. And so the comments will probably come after. There have been a few that have come. I just haven't shared them up on the screen. But trust me, this will be watched. This will be commented on probably prolifically.
Yeah.
What do you want to say?
Well, you know, I'm not sure that being loved, you know, I think inside of me, I would be like, I wish that everybody, because I remember with Frisbee, it was like, it was all positive. And with the Larry Norman one, you know, it's been a mixed bag. I think that's the way it should be. You know, I'm telling the truth. I'm trying to tell the truth. I'm trying to do something that not many people would put their necks out to do. And I'm not saying that I'm doing anything amazing, because let's be honest, in the mainstream, this happens all the time. It doesn't happen in the church. This is the thing. Here's people that are talking about the truth,
right, and
extolling and saying, "Oh, I'm interested in this," and you know, Jesus is the truth and stuff like that. And yet, when they're told the truth, what's the first thing that they do? They don't, right?
No, they attack the guy who told the truth.
The irony of that is not lost on, you know, the world. Right. You know, Why can't you tell the truth about this guy? Why can't Larry Norman be screwed up? Why?
What's at stake here?
What did I say that was? What did I say, that he was going to hell? I didn't say that. I said the guy was, lost. Okay, but he still created this music that influenced all these people. I'll give him that. I don't get it.
How are you getting along with Charles today? Charles Norman.
I don't know, Charles. Charles and
I heard a radio interview that you guys did with Rich Bueller a few years ago that was incendiary. I mean, oh my gosh.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Let me read something to you. Here's something that came in. This is a guy named Dick Lane. Do you know Dick?
No.
Okay, I don't either. But he said, Bob. But he said, Bob, this guy is a fraud. Here we go. He used Larry Norman's music in Frisbee without permission, and Larry protested. He then proceeded to make Fallen Angel with the express goal of making Larry look bad. Several people were badgered by David emails as he continued to tirade against anything Larry. He smiles in interviews, sounds great, but hate lies behind that smile.
Well, I sound great. That's what he said. Let me just correct him with respect to the Frisbee stuff. Larry and I battled. What I found out that Larry didn't own any of that music. Larry doesn't own any of his early stuff. So all those, oh no, not a thing. So all that stuff that he's releasing on CD, it's illegal. All the stuff that they have for sale, they don't own any of it. And he would have told stories, because I tried to get, he says, well, if you get, Larry's, this is vintage Larry. He says, well, send me a check for $7,000 and I'll go to EMI and I'll get them to allow you to use the music for your film. Right? Vintage Larry. And what I found out as we had to go to court and people will say, oh, you sued Larry Norman. I didn't sue Larry Norman. What happened was, in order to get those things passed for fair use, which is how I got them in the movie, you have to go to court and ask them to clear it and name the people that are going to complain. So that's what we did. But here's why you can use that music. Fair use is a legal term that tempers copyright. So I wasn't using the whole song. I was using part of it. I was telling a story. In the movie Expelled, they used the song Imagine from John Lennon. Yoko Ono sued them. She lost because the judge said, by fair use law, you can use this because it's on the books. So I didn't do anything wrong. So this guy, what's he doing? His research on the internet?
I have no idea, but here's a guy named David Shaw that came in after and said, hey, Larry didn't need any help looking bad.
I know David. David's a smart guy. Yeah, I know David. Good for him.
Yeah. Well, there you go.
Thank you so much. I appreciate talking to you. I left this alone for a long time, like the documentaries, because it's just so hard. Because I was finishing up Fallen Angel when the bottom fell out of the world. We went into that deep recession.
Right.
So it's like, and now that you got to think whether you're going to do this, whether it's going to be monetarily worthwhile. And I struggled with that for a long time because, you take away from your family and stuff like that. And now I'm in a position to do it again. So who knows? But
what are you doing these days to make money?
Oh,
This and that.
This and that. I have my father was an entrepreneur, so I have those skills.
I know you do.
Yeah.
Hey, we didn't even get into stuff like, man, I had some stuff I wanted to ask you about Agape, who I know you're a big proponent of, and the All Save Freak Band. Some of that stuff, because I really like the I know that especially with All Save Freak Band there were cult overtones, and and maybe with Agape too, right?
Well,
wasn't there a Children of God aspect in that?
Only in the sense that that's where he got saved. But I think
okay.
Fred walked into the original Light Club, but I think that they were more mainstream then because Mama Berg was still alive. And Mama Berg was holding David back from being a complete nutball. Once that happened, the Light Club morphed into the Children of God. But Fred had nothing to do with that. So Fred was apart from that. Now, the All Save Freak Band, that's a whole different thing. But that's sort of a fundamentalist guy they got involved with. A fundamentalist preacher gone crazy. Have you seen this stuff, though? Glenn Schwartz that got up with Joe Walsh at Coachella?
No. What?
Yeah. Go on. Do you know who Joe Marco is? Joe Marco was the lead guitarist, or one of the guitarists in the All Say Freak Band, and one of the singers. I thought the best singer, to be honest. Okay. And on Joe's site, he has this thing from Coachella because Glenn Schwartz, who was the guitar player that taught them how to play music, who got saved originally at Kent State in Ohio and joined that band and joined that group, is now coming out. I mean, in his 70s, finally got back up on stage after he played this little Cleveland bar, and he would people would come by and he'd say these really pointed fundamentalist things. He'd quote these horrible verses from the Old Testament. Oh, he's a character. Anyways, he got back up on stage, and the guy is a phenomenal guitar player.
Right.
So it's out there. I mean, the All Say Freak Band lives again.
It's interesting. So many stories that could be told, right?
That's a story. I tried to do that, but I think Joe was reticent to do that because, anytime you tell a story about a cult, the people tend to be, it's tough, because it's like they want to say, you'd do the same too, and that's a tough sell because who knows? I was never in that position myself. So I don't know how I respond or what, if you can turn to them and say, well, there's something lacking in you that wanted to go to that. I don't know. Those are unfair assumptions,
right?
But it's a great story. It's a sad story.
Right. And they're right. We don't know what our response would be in the midst of that. I mean, what I believed 20 years ago, I look back and go, what in the world was I thinking? Right. Seriously. I mean, we all kind of shift and change as time goes by. But even like the Children of God stuff, I mean, I would love to see you unleashed on the Berg story and some of that. Have you ever considered that?
That's no, only because it's just it's outside of the realm of my understanding, in the sense that I understand it. It's just it's not mainstream. He's almost he's channeling spirits and writing his own Bible. He's got 4 or 5, and I've got them here. He's got 4 or 5 leather-bound things that they passed around the communities, and it's all based around sex and sex with children. It's so gross, It
is.
It's not something that, you have to pick your stories. After going through the Larry thing and being involved in that, I had a guy turn to me and goes, "Why do you want to do such a bad story?" He says, "It has an effect on you." And I was like, I didn't get it at first. And again, I didn't start it that way, and certainly didn't make up the facts. But it does. You go into this darkness, you stare into the abyss will stare back at you. And that's, I don't want to do that again,
Right.
I thought, and I'll be honest, the naivete of dealing with a sociopath, let's not, skimp on that word, because I think that fits. They have an effect on you.
Yeah.
And you start to want to fight back.
Right.
And that's not good, and I felt myself. I wanted to fight them, and I said, I dropped the gloves. And it's fine in defense, but when you're taking the offense, then are you becoming the exact same person that you're railing against? Right?
And listen, you're very proficient at removing the gloves. I can remember you coming into internet rooms and the gloves would come off within about a minute. I mean, oh, Sabby's here. Here we go. And I would just sit back and make popcorn, man.
I don't know if that's because I'm bored and I don't know. I don't know what it is. I need to go to counseling. I don't know.
Let me ask you a question.
Sure.
And we'll finish up with this. David Sabatino today. What is winning in your mind and heart? Cynicism or hope?
I don't know that those things are, unfortunately, that word has been hijacked. Cynicism, should I go into a discourse on this? The original cynics were people that spoke up.
I understand.
And doubted. Diogenes and the cynics. I mean, they were, he named them because they were dogs barking. And what does a dog bark? When does a dog bark? When somebody's approaching, when there's something that's wrong. He alerts people to that. So, that's how I understand cynics. It's become synonymous with jaded. I was never that.
No, I don't see it that way.
I mean, I see and I'm hopeful, but because you're so hopeful, you want to point to the darkness and say, this is darkness.
Right.
That's all I'm doing. I mean, this is dark. This is light. Let's go towards the light. But you have to know what the darkness is too. You can't just sit around and pretend that doesn't happen.
Right.
Right. Some of those rooms where they discuss Jesus music and stuff like that, so naive in the sense that all they want to do is talk about this album and this cover and stuff like that. The minute that you turn and say, well, this guy wrote this song and it happens to be about this, they go freaky. It's like you're attacking. We just talk about the music. We don't want to talk about theology. Okay. So there's no discourse beyond that, and so I don't understand that. That's not me. I want to talk about that stuff, and I don't see why that's a problem.
And you think it's okay? I mean, you just question when you see things. The questions pop into your mind.
Yeah.
Is that accurate?
Yeah, and so that's, to me, that's hopeful because I want to know.
My gosh, I should let you go, but this is like having coffee with you. And why would I want to stop having coffee with you?
I'm here.
Can I throw out a name?
Sure.
Marcia Stevens.
Yeah. You have a question about that?
Marcia Stevens, for everybody, she wrote "For Those Tears I Died," which was a seminal song of the Jesus movement early out of Chuck Smith's place, out of Calvary Chapel. She was just a kid. She was the leader of Children of the Day, and then later left her husband and children, I think, and said, I'm a lesbian, and has been involved with the Metropolitan Community Church for a million years. Right. I remember some conversation about her on Chuck's board where Chuck even came in on some stuff, and it's so easy for us to we're quick with the gun to shoot people in the head. But what are your thoughts on Marcia?
Marcia is a friend of mine on Facebook. I've gone to interview her at a Metropolitan Community Church. I've talked to her at length about this. I remember the big brouhaha, I wasn't around, but I remember that there was a big argument when that first happened in the Orange County Register, and Marcia gave her. Oh yeah, there's all sorts of documentation about it. Marcia was saying, I'm being ostracized from the very church that I helped. Right. And so you have this fundamental cleft because she's decided to become an outspoken lesbian.
Right.
And that church is saying, look, then go to a lesbian church. And she's saying, I want to stay here because these are my people. Why can't I stay here? And, so this argument happened, and Chuck was like, why can't you just go somewhere else? Because her own sister, I think, ostracized her as well because she disagreed with, and that's how evangelicals do it. They shun people. They treat people with that. So anytime that the old Jesus music reunions happened, even though Marcia was part of the biggest album that they sold in 71, those two albums, Everlasting Living Jesus Music album and Come to the Waters by Children of the Day, which she wrote, she was never invited. So I don't think the Children of Day participated. No, they said, you are not. What Calvary Chapel felt was, if we allow Marcia up on stage, that says we condone homosexuality.
Oh my.
That's what they think. Well, that's how they think, and so they, again, this is another person that's been sidelined from their history.
Yeah.
So that's how they treat that situation. That's how churches treat that situation. And I think that's wrong. I think that, she was part of your history. To negate that, I don't think she should say anything. And I think people should be smart enough to know that Chuck's not condoning homosexuality just because she's there. They're just remembering her as a loving human being that, this is her choice, and that's fine. But
she's part of their story.
Yeah. I don't get that.
I don't either. And she's been very gracious with me. When all of this first broke, when I found out about it years ago, I sniffed around and found her email address, and she was so gracious. She answered me. Why in the world did she didn't need to answer me? And I just asked her, some blunt questions like, tell me how this happened. I didn't know that she wanted to stay.
Yeah, I believe originally, yeah. I don't think it was possible at that time. She told me a story that she had a little conversation with a guy who was a big name out of the Jesus movement and was gay himself, but kept it hidden. And he said to her, because Marcia was outspoken, and he said, but you're only playing for 100 people. He says, why didn't you just be quiet? And Marcia's answer was, because I have to be true to myself. But I understand why he never said anything. I think he said something somewhere, but not in North America. Wow. So
you don't want to tell us. You don't want to tell us who it is.
It was Andre Crouch.
Ah, there you go.
Yeah.
And those rumors were out there forever.
I'm not. People. He's never about Andre Crouch. Andre Crouch came out in South Africa and said he was gay. So I don't know if I'm just relaying the information that I know.
And heads are exploding all over the internet.
Send those letters to, that's just the way it was. And everybody knew about Andre.
Right.
And, it's a tough issue. What do you do, Bob? The guy comes into your church and says, I want to be here. So you're an open-minded pastor and you say, sure, no problem. You can be here. Then he says, I want to teach Sunday school. I want to be on your board of elders.
There you go.
Where do you go with that?
And I want to bring my boyfriend and sit with him and hold hands. And here we go, man. It's the issue, David.
I don't know what to say to people. I have a lot of compassion for people who say, listen, I talked to so many of them that came to me and said, listen, when you were coming up, you were, whenever it was 8, 9 earlier, and you were having pangs of opposite sex attraction, I was having pangs of same-sex attraction. Nobody touched me. Nobody did anything. My mother wasn't overly... No reason.
Right.
What do you say to that? You start quoting them Leviticus?
Yeah, right. Well, I have thoughts on that, but they are way too spiritual for this. Well, one of these days I may get into this and talk, because I'm telling you, I believe I've seen some things. And my life from the early 20s, and I'm 60 years old now, from the time I was in my early 20s, I have had gay men, mostly, some women, but gay men have come to me at such a number that I can't begin to count how many there have been. And I've been privileged to walk with pastors who are gay. I have been privileged to walk with husbands and fathers who live a secret life. And I can tell you this much. Let me tell you what I think. And then maybe you can comment. I don't think anybody chooses whether they're going to be gay or not. And I don't care. I know that the jury is still out about nature versus nurture or whatever. I don't care, because who chooses, who just wakes up one morning and says, hey, the suicide rate is 15 times the national average. Drug abuse is like 50 times the national average. But I think I want to try that. Right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So,
absolutely.
So I live life a little bit different, and I'm probably on the fringe of the fringe when it comes to this stuff. But I want to love who Jesus loved. I want to hang out with who I think Jesus would hang out with. And I had a guy I ministered. Listen to me using spiritual language. I spoke at my local mission just a week ago. And there were some men that were in program. All of them had to be there, court ordered. They were part of a program for a period of time. So 30 men in a room that have to be there. And everybody, the other speakers all talked about their background and, gave their quote unquote testimony. And I didn't want to do that. Instead, I told them who I was, which, David, I'm a father. That's what I do. I love people that way. And so I just told them that. And a young man came up to me afterwards and he said, so I'm gay. And I said, okay. And he said, and what's your response if I say I want to come to your church? And I said, come on, man. And he said, can I bring my boyfriend? But I have to tell you, even with where I'm at, there was a little bit of, angst in me, like, man, why are you coming to me? Because I'm just being honest, because it brings up issues with other folk that I'd rather not have to deal with. But then somebody has to deal with this stuff, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Because the opposite, because to not deal with it just hurts all those people. These people are out there and they're looking for love and support, and we're not giving it to them. I mean, we're telling them that we're coming up with new ways to tell them that they're sinners as opposed to us, as opposed to this. And when I was doing the Frisbee thing, I went around and I said, well, why are you going after Lonnie for this? And you're not going to go after, let's say, John Hagee for being a big fat guy, right. Or any of the other fat guys that, why is that not? Obesity is not good. And it's certainly a sin that's outlined in the Bible, probably more than homosexuality. So why aren't you? And the answers that I would get, were like, David, come on. Just like, oh, you're being silly, Dave. And I'm like, I'm not being silly. That's an honest question. And why are you just glibly answering this? Because they don't see it that way. It's been taught to them that this is the number one sin, that this is the reason that America is sliding down whatever scale it is, and blah, blah, blah. And these people are taking us into it's nonsense.
Taking us into what? Yeah, exactly.
I don't see any justification for it whatsoever. I mean, in the Frisbee where I got mad was when that vineyard guy was saying, we went around and we followed Lonnie. You followed him? I was so incensed the minute he said that. I was like, do you not hear what you're saying?
Right.
Right. Why are you hounding this kid? Well, I didn't want him to what? Sin?
Right.
What about, and how many times do I get asked, do you mean Lonnie was sinning the same time that he was in the pulpit preaching? And I'm like, as opposed to who? As opposed to, you're just not widening your eyes and seeing that, we all do stuff even in that moment.
Right.
It's not just him, and you can't sideline him just for that. You said you talked to somebody about that. Peggy Campolo wrote me a letter after seeing Frisbee. I know, and talked to me at length, 3-4 page letter about how she had gotten such flack. She was saying this 25 years ago.
I know she was.
And she was alone, saying that these people are children of God and this is not their choice. And who knows why she said that, because certainly wasn't the popular stance. And she has to stand against her husband back then, not now.
Right.
And, just extolling that. And I was like, this woman's incredible. Good for you. And again, I don't know what the ramifications of that are in somebody's life. They have to work out that for themselves. I don't know for your life. People say, well, the Bible says a lot of stuff, and where are you going to plant your flag, is
the church historically has made this a hill to die on. I mean, they seriously have. We will die on this hill saying that we are correct at the cost of people, but that's what organizations sometimes do. And Dave, I'm a little bit broken this way. It's I'm not anti-organization or anti-system or anti-institution or anti any of that, but maybe I am. Some things happened to my own daughter that happened within, and I'll say it, it's a Foursquare denomination where she was molested, and she's okay with me talking about this stuff. She was molested at a church repeatedly for years by a young man, and when this stuff broke, when she filed a lawsuit, went to court, immediately the institution, rather than checking to see, are you okay, sweetheart, circled the wagons and began to assassinate her character. This is how things go, David. You know this.
Chapuza.
Yes.
The guys that were always pointing a finger at everybody else now have the finger pointed back at them.
Right.
And they hide behind lawyers.
Right. Organizations, man, they will circle those wagons they will save an organization and a system over a life. They will sacrifice lives for the institution. That's my thought.
I don't know. I saw a documentary just recently on Reinhold Niebuhr, and he wrote extensively on this, that institutions are evil. It's just the way they are. They will, if you get involved with that at some point, you will have to, raise the flag of the institution when they're doing absolute heinous things. It's just the nature of the being, of the beast.
And there's another story that should be told someday as Reinhold Niebuhr.
Yeah. No.
I mean, really, come on.
Yeah. So, I remember you telling that story about your daughter, and that's just, I have 3 grandchildren, and it just scares me to death. It's like there are people that are twisted out there, and that you can't be there all the time to protect them. And I've said to my wife, and this sounds horrible, but I would spend 20 years, I wouldn't know what to do with myself if I came across somebody that had harmed one of mine that way. I mean, it's so tough. I would, we talk about forgiveness and stuff like that until somebody pokes you, and then it's tough.
The gloves come off.
The gloves come off, and I wish maybe I need to be more ironic. I don't know. This is my nature. I think there are times when violence is justified. Can we say that?
Sure.
I think there is. I think you have to stand against evil.
Right.
But it has to be a last resort.
Right.
But I tell you, I understand that people get, want to raise arms and fight. I understand that. I mean,
the frustration level gets so high that here you go. Let me tell you something that happened in the midst. And again, we're just having coffee, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So, a representative of the Foursquare denomination called me after all of this happened, and it was my daughter, not me. But they knew me because I had been licensed through them, and I went through their Bible college and all of these things. And so I was a known commodity to them. So the phone rang, and the day after she filed, and they said, the people are very angry. The higher ups are very angry at you. And I said, well, I didn't do anything here. It's my daughter, but you really shouldn't be angry. You should be asking how my daughter is. And then this woman said, well, we think you're lying. We think you're a liar. And isn't it true? And then she began to come at me. And I'll tell you what, there was an anger that rose up in me that was at a very high level, to a point where I said, she had just called me a liar again. And I said, listen, I need you to really measure the next thing you're going to say. I said, do you understand who you're speaking with? And she said, yes, I'm speaking to Bob Prater. And I said, that's true. I said, but you were speaking with a man who walks with and hears from God. I said, for your sake, please measure your words carefully. And she hung up. But that isn't all I wanted to do. I wanted to, man, I'm broken this way. I'm broken this way because of roads I've been down and the way that I view.
Sure. You want to fight. You want to fight back. And it's just, I've often described combating evil like emptying a pool with a spoon. It's just, it's pervasive. I mean, where do you, Everywhere you turn, the corruption. I don't know, you know, the killing in the name of greed and
Sure.
and then our churches have turned into what? You know, no voice, no, and you know, and it gets your soul very weary because we all read the New Testament and God, we all get all hyped and goofed up on that, and we want to go out and do stuff, and then you run into a wall, and it's like, oh man, you know, sometimes our side is worse than the people that we're supposed to be against.
You think?
And you just like, I listen to people talk and I think, how in the world did you get to that? And they're defending something that's indefensible, and they've lost their way. And the only thing you can do is just move on, you know, because you got to pick your fights. You know,
I agree.
There's so much stuff that we could get involved with, like, you know, sex trafficking. What the heck? There are people that have lost their humanity so badly that they're taking young girls and putting them into this. And how isn't
that's near and dear to my heart, Dave? Because I don't know if you know, but that's something that I'm involved in. I mean, I'm involved in fighting sex trafficking. We go out on the streets, man, a group of us, and we've got a safe house up in the mountains. We rescue people. We really rescue people. This is the real deal stuff. And you're right. People, you want to know what I think here? Let me tell you what I think as we're having coffee. I think that cities and churches make agreements with places like, in my city, it's Union Avenue. That's where all the prostitution is. That's where much of the crime is. And the city of Bakersfield looks the other way. And here's what they say. They say, as long as you're not killing each other, we will turn a blind eye to the prostitution, to the children. I've seen children as young as 12 out on the street. Children, the drugs, all of the brokenness, as long as you keep it there and you don't bring it into our neighborhoods. You follow me? And I think the church makes the same agreement where, hey, yeah, we love you, poor people. We really do. We love to engage you, and every once in a while we'll come and give you money, and we'll feed you a little bit. But don't be mistaken here. We have no intention of doing life with you.
Yeah.
So how do we change that mindset?
I don't know.
I don't know either.
I don't. You know, my cousins are all involved in church up in Canada, and I mean. And even down here, it seems like the thing that we're interested in is putting butts in pews, singing songs, and raising offering for God knows what.
Yeah.
And social action is an afterthought.
Right.
And I don't know that I want to be involved in something where it's an afterthought. You know, I don't know. You know, how did the church become more important than your family?
Yeah, that's good.
How did that happen? You know, but it is for so many people.
Because the institution demands.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
And so to feel good about ourselves, we just say yes and we go along. You go along to get along, Dave, right?
No. I mean, I don't understand that.
Well, no, you don't. No.
You know, it's just not me. From the time that I was in my early 20s, I was like, I cannot do this. You know,
right.
I don't know what was in me that just looked at it and just went, that is not for me. I am not going to just go sing songs and just play the game. I just, you know, so I don't know. Am I the mental one? I don't think so. You know, I saw it. And I'm with you. I'm like, what? All these other issues, they're getting bent out of shape. If I swear, they'll get bent out of shape over that. Because that's more important.
Are you serious?
You know what I mean? Somebody drops an F-bomb, they go nuts, and yet there's poverty, there's sex trafficking, there's all sorts of other issues that have to be near and dear to the heart of God.
Right.
That these little girls are being violated. You think, how can't we be spending all the time there? You know, I don't know what the answer is either. People come to me and say, "Oh, you're complaining all the time." What's the answer? I have no flipping clue. I don't know. Let's clear the board and start again. Let's put a lock. I've said this. Bob Weber was a friend of mine, and he put it in his book that I said something to the effect. I wrote him one day, and I said, put a lock on all the churches, tell them that we've gone, and just say, go do it now. He thought that was great. He said, I think it put it in one of his things, and I was like, okay, but I meant it, you know?
Right.
Wouldn't we be better off?
I really like, you brought up the Campolo name.
Yeah.
So Tony Campolo is a real deal hero walking on earth to me. Yeah. I mean, he just is. Yeah. And when you bring up profanity, it reminds me, I just pulled something up. And you know this famous quote. I'm just going to read it, and we'll let the chips fall where they may. Because I'm quoting Tony Campolo, right? I have 3 things I'd like to say today. This was him at a conference of some sort back in the whatevers. I have 3 things I'd like to say today. First, while you were sleeping last night, 30,000 kids died of starvation or diseases related to malnutrition. Second, most of you don't give a shit. What's worse is that you're more upset with the fact that I said shit than the fact that 30,000 kids died last night. Now, how can that guy not be a hero, right?
Yeah.
Come on.
Vilified. When I was at that magazine that we shall not name now, the guys that owned it or had just bought it, they were the heads of Salem Publishing. I don't know if that name means anything to you, but sure. They are the fundy of all fundy group. Sure. They control all of the right-wing media streaming on the net. This is a big institution. Yes. Salem Publishing is a huge, huge thing. They invited George Bush to their alma mater, which was, what's that place? What's that really fundy place? Bob Jones University. And,
yes.
And he went, and Bush went. And so these are the kind of guys they are. These guys are really powerful guys. As they're walking through, seeing what they've bought, they bump into me. I don't have to answer to them because my owner is in California and he wasn't told about the sale. So I can say basically whatever I want.
Right.
And I had respect for them because they weren't nasty. But they came to me, and one of the guys pulled me aside and he said 2 things. He said, first, we don't want any women in ministry on the cover or anything or any stories about that.
What?
And I had just put to bed an editorial issue on women in ministry. And the second thing he said is, I don't ever want to see Tony Campolo in this magazine. That's what he said. And we had just done an interview. And I was getting ready to publish it, and I was like, that's not going to happen. Whatever you want, you know.
Why did they want Campolo? For that reason?
For that reason, they don't. Those lefty, those right winger guys, they hate him. Well, I hate him. I shouldn't say that.
I know.
But
no.
he is representing an avenue of Christianity that they do not like.
Yeah.
You know? They do not like him. And he said that straight to my face. I was like, whoa. I said, and I protested. I said, first of all, women in ministry, I said to the guy, I said, it's not like I'm arguing for them being in ministry. We kind of take it as a given. They are there. So we're just reflecting that. He goes, well, we don't like that. I said, okay. But Tony Campolo, what's the problem? And he mumbled something. I was just like, why do you not like Tony? I love Tony. There's nothing about Tony that I think he resonates the gospel as I understand it, closer than most. Right. And he didn't have much to come back to. They just didn't like him. So there you go. You say the truth, and people don't like it. They don't. It challenges them. It makes them uncomfortable. It makes them nervous. And
it's it.
And you pay for it.
Yeah. It's interesting to me. You mentioned Chuck Smith didn't like all the Amy Semple McPherson stuff. So there's a woman that was in ministry, quite a big star in Los Angeles in the 20s and 30s. And you may not know this, or maybe you do, that Chuck was a graduate of Life Bible College, which was the Foursquare School. So it's interesting to me. I would have loved to have had conversation with him about how he got from point A to point Z.
With regards to?
With regards to, I mean, he didn't want the wild stuff, but it's what he was in.
See, but that's what that's the great thing about Lonnie. He comes along and Chuck can't deny it. He'd seen the nonsense, right? So this kid, which you would never in a million years, if you're Chuck Smith, you would never let this guy up on your pulpit. You're a John Bircher, you're right wing, you're Republican, right. And he's homosexual. Come on. But he sees that Lonnie is suffused with the power of God. And he says it. I couldn't deny it.
Yeah.
What was on him was undeniable.
Genuine.
I felt the presence of the Holy Spirit. Chuck Smith Jr. was like walking with one of the apostles. Listening to these stories, you just got the sense that God was doing something absolutely fantastical through this kid that had nothing to do with him. There is nothing that Lonnie could claim and say, well, I went to seminary and my oratory is... No! He just showed up. In fact, one of the great stories, and he knew it, he says, I'm going to get up there and I'm going to talk about peanut butter for the next 5 minutes. And at the end of that story, I'm going to invite people to come up and watch what happens. And sure enough, like do with a story like that, right? He's talking about peanut butter and how he loves Jif and loves crunchy, and he's talking about nothing. And he goes, anybody want to receive Jesus? And so you talk to these people who were there and just go, and they're just shaking their heads as they recount this. They're like, what the? Chuck Smith has a baptistry in his, the little font or whatever you call it they had just built it. And Lonnie tells him, he says, I think God wants us to go baptize in the ocean. Chuck is like, what are you talking about? Right? And so Lonnie says, no, we're going to do this. And Chuck goes, under no circumstances are we going to do this. So the next night, Lonnie's up on stage and he says, we're going to have a baptism next Saturday in the Pacific Ocean. And Chuck is freaking out. What are you doing? We've got a baptistry. They get all upset and stuff like that. He goes, nobody's going to come. It's too cold. What happens, right? The rest is history. And Time magazine shows up.
Right.
Like film, and, and you're like, how does Lonnie know this? Because God is speaking to him. And he's authentic. And he's not putting on airs. He's just being, he was a goofy kid. And he just opened his mouth and God honored it.
Yeah, what did you say? What did you say earlier? You said that you felt like God wanted you to honor the prophet.
Yeah, I think when I came down to California in 1998, what I heard from his friends were a lot of pain that he had been marginalized because they picked up on Lonnie's pain. One of the saddest things about Lonnie's life, at the end of his life, he's carrying around a binder with all of his press clippings.
Oh.
Yeah. It's like, it's sad. It's like, but he wanted to be validated. And these guys hadn't validated. So he had largely been, I'm not going to say the dirty little secret, but and in fairness to them, they don't want to deal with it. How do you deal with it? They're not equipped. Yeah, hold on one second. Yeah. Hey, Tim, can you go around the back? Can you go around the back? Or do you need to get in here? Okay, hold on one second. I'll be right back.
No worries, man.
I'll open it. Hold on, Tim.
All right, so once again, man, this has been a very fascinating little journey. Hey, Aaron, it's good to see you, my friend. Stephen Happel, it's good to see you. And this has been a real fascinating, at least for me, conversation with David Sabatino. And it's gone longer than I thought it would go, but man, I just, it's like we're having coffee. And I'm just, he's dropping knowledge. We were,
what are we talking about?
You were talking about when you came down to Southern California and you began to.
Right. There was a lot of angst towards that Lonnie had been marginalized and written out, and he had not been given his due. And his friends were very much complaining. It was like, this is not right. And again, I think they picked up on Lonnie's disappointment with that. And so I said, hopefully we can fix that.
Right.
And with the documentary, I think certainly there's not too many people that in that realm, or in Southern California, that don't know about him now, and I'm glad of that. The funny thing about that is they didn't want me to talk about the homosexuality, so they wanted him to be right. So there's always something, even in Roger Sachs' book, I'm sure he said that he didn't see any homosexuality, and so therefore it didn't happen. So and I'll tell you another story about that, because as I'm going to put this thing out there, I realized that I'm talking about a guy, and I don't have prima facie evidence. I don't have firsthand account of somebody who's actually slept with him. And I was like, I've heard rumor, and I've heard reports, and other people have said yes, that happened between these two guys and stuff like that. But I didn't have anybody that had come to me. So I kind of went, God, I need to find somebody that, and how do you do that? So I get this call from this guy that I don't know. He says, come on over. I want to be interviewed. I was a friend of Lonnie's at the beginning, during the Vineyard years, blah, blah, blah. And so as we're interviewing, he starts to confess that they've slept together and that they had a relationship. And I'm like, well, you look at that. It was like 2 weeks later. And I was like, holy crap, here it is, and he's telling me this, and it's a, perfectly valid story, made sense. He was confused by it and didn't understand it. And then he tells me that he wants me to put it in the movie. And I said, buddy, no. I said, you're married and you have kids. I said, you're asking for a whole world of pain if you come out and say that. I said, there is no way we're putting that in there. So we will just not use it at all. I said, unless we put you in blackface, and I don't want to do that. And to be honest, we don't need to do this. I think with what Chuck said, I think, Chuck Jr. is a credible witness. We didn't need to put in, anything else than that. But, it was there. So at least I could say, from my evidentiary. So when these guys come back to me and say, well, it never happened because I didn't, I've done the homework. I did what I needed to do so that I could say that. Now, I get it that you love your friend and you don't want, I get that, and I respect that. But if you want to know, ask me, and I will point you in the right direction. And see, that's the thing. People don't want to do that. These people that are upset with me, I always say to them, go to Nashville, or go talk to Randy Stonehill. Okay? And even with journalists, how many times did I tell journalists, pick up the phone and talk to Tom Howard, which you can't do anymore because it's gone.
Right.
Talk to Stonehill, talk to Ray Ware, talk to these people. Listen to what they have to say and tell me that I'm off.
Right.
And they never, ever do it. They would rather just complain that David did this and blah, 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 and they never do the homework.
Right. Hey, okay. Speaking of Tom Howard, and I have one more question, and then maybe we'll wrap this up. But View from the Bridge, which was his first album for Larry, has never seen the light of day digitally that I know of.
Yeah.
What's the holdup with that?
Well, I don't know. I mean, ask my friend Charles. I don't know. I know that there was this big thing that when Larry died, that he gave permission to release Steve Scott's album. Mm. Larry, it's funny. Randy talked about Larry acting like the high priest, which is so funny because it's like, here he's acting like the high priest, and yet, he was so wonky.
Right.
He gives out these edicts like he carried himself like he's an Old Testament prophet, and it's like, once you're past the shine, you're just like, Larry, just relax. Anyways, I don't know why. I don't think it would sell that well, Yeah,
maybe not, but my gosh, I want to hear it again instead of my scratched up vinyl, right?
Sure.
All right. One last question. You mentioned that Lonnie, towards the end of his days, was carrying a notebook around with his press clippings, and it's kind of a sad picture of someone who was really a lion in the to use a Christian term, in the kingdom. He was really truly a lion in the kingdom for such an unassuming man. But we see this picture at the end, And now I'm starting to think about some of the heroes of the Jesus movement, and especially those who are involved in Jesus music, who are getting up in years, and there's no system. I met not long ago with Barry McGuire, who is still out having to do the stuff because he just doesn't have the money to make it. I hear about Terry Taylor. Sometimes he's been sick lately. What is that, and what can we do to make that different?
What is that? You know, part of being a Christian means you're not going to be hooked up into the mainstream market. Right. So Jimi Hendrix plays his fuzz guitar Star Spangled Banner for 100 people really on Monday afternoon. But you know it because somebody can make money off of it.
Right.
Right? There's a culture there. There's a money-making need. There's somebody driving it. That doesn't happen with the early stuff. There's no market because, A, it was never on radio. Or it was on Christian radio, and Christian radio was in its infancy, and it's just not. There's also, I mean, I could go on at length. The evangelical movement is forward-looking. They're not nostalgic. But not only not nostalgic, whereas, you know, if you're a hippie into rock music, your nostalgia starts with, Crosby, Stills, Nash, Woodstock. You know, it starts in the 60s. Christianity is 2,000 years. So your nostalgia, if you're a Calvinist, is the 16th century. You know, you have all this other stuff. Certainly not going to go back to the 60s, 1960s with Larry Norman and Randy Stonehill.
Right.
Go to the Fish Festival, go to some of these festivals and ask people who they are. No clue. Right. Or Randy Matthews or any of that. You have a very finite market. It's these old Jesus music. And those guys are almost, their take on it is almost ridiculously naive. I'll give you an example. I talked to the guy who was going to do the Keith Green movie. He was constricted, but he had the option to do it with Melody Green. And he came to me and he said, I don't know if I can do this because they want something different than he is. Because as he was going around, he was hearing, and I'm not saying, it wasn't nothing like Larry or Lonnie, but he's not, you know, he's not Lily White. You know, he had some issues, you know. And
he did, didn't he?
Yeah, he was a piece of work. You know, the more I learn about him, the more I'm like, you know. So he couldn't do the movie because he realized that the audience has expectations that don't jive with the reality. So if I could say something to the fellow that's, you know, up in arms, they're the problem. They're a real problem because what you're looking for perfection, or part of the problem of the Christian music industry or the Christian film industry is the audience. They have unrealistic expectations. They want those silly movies where, you know, I'm a coach, I'm 0-14 this year, but now I give my heart to Jesus and everything turns around. What?
Stop.
What is that?
Stop. I mean, you're talking about the Tim Tebow effect, basically, right?
Yeah. Why is he famous? Because he put John 15 under his thing, and he did a commercial about abortion, right? Okay. Right. This is why we give this guy praise, and because he's good looking. And
he speaks the party line. Let's be clear about that.
So, you know, to me, the guys that are on the fringe, the guys that are bleeding, the guys that are, maybe that's part of the way it goes. You know, Mike Knott is marginalized because he's bleeding in his music. He's not going to sell, you know, to that Christian music audience. They don't want to hear that. They don't want to hear Jesus, you know, can you give me some money in the mail? They don't want to hear that. I mean, to me, that's hilarious. You know,
right.
They don't want to hear that stuff. They want their presuppositions reinforced and reaffirmed.
Yeah.
What are you going to do, man? I wish it was different.
Here we are, man. 2017. I didn't think I'd live to see it. And I think back to all the stuff in the 70s. Man, it's odd to me to see Randy still out on tour, Stonehill. And I know my friend Barry McGuire is still, you know, tripping the 60s and doing what he does from Fresno. And part of it makes my heart really, really sad. Because these guys who gave their lives for others and literally changed the earth a bit are not being honored or taken care of as they get older.
One of the things that they can do, churches could open themselves up and have them as artists in residence, because I think that they have a lot of a lot of stuff to offer.
Right.
But you'd have to have a guy with a lot of foresight and money in the church coffers to spend on that. And
Right.
churches don't have that kind of artistic vision. It's very utilitarian. It's all about propagation of the gospel. So instead of getting him, they can get some 16-year-old that just got signed to a, right? So why bother with territorial? You can have the hot new thing, right? So
yeah. When you get and I was involved. Well, not involved, but I know of a church where all worship leaders over a certain age were excised because we're always going after the young generation, the new generation. So we have to speak what's current and what's new, and we have to speak the language of youth, or else. And that's at the expense sometimes of some very wise people who have been down roads, right?
If you don't fit what they're doing, see you later. Thanks
all
for
right,
the.
man. Exactly right. Yeah, thanks for the time. But what have you done for me lately?
Right.
Yeah. All right, Dave. Listen, man, this has been one of the high privileges and honors. We went way over what I thought we'd do. We went almost 2 hours. So, but I guarantee you, this is going to stir a couple of things, I would imagine. And I look forward to the next time. Maybe when you're a little further along in the Mike Knott process, we can talk again.
Sure. Thanks, Bob. Appreciate it.
All right, man. Have a good one. See ya.